Morning. So in my role at Genentech, Roche, is to basically support the procurement organization in assessing supplier business continuity or risk of supply. Although as you'll see when I get into my presentation, our focus is more on catastrophic loss of supply, which we define as an interruption of 6 months or greater. But we collaborate very much with the supplier quality organization to handle the day-in, day-out operational risks as well. I'm going to go ahead and get right into the management process overview and not get into a lot of the detail behind what is Roche. You can see that at your own leisure when you have a chance. And then my topic today is to talk about challenges in raw material and supplier management, risk management. And so I've put together 6 areas that I want to address that I find in my role and in working with the procurement organization and our suppliers where I see the most challenge happening. One is human cognitive bias, in other words, how we think, how we relate, how we feel about risk itself. Talk about supply chain complexity. We've heard a little bit about that already. Business continuity management, which I think is the core of what I want to speak to today. And then the relationship between the supplier and the manufacturer. Okay? And then a little bit on regulatory compliance, and then finally a little bit on sustainability. Okay? So I'm going to skip by these slides so that you can see these at your leisure. But I will point out that when I talk about my role, it is with global pharma procurement. So that includes Roche Pharma, Genentech, and we collaborate closely with Chugai, which is our partner in Japan. And we're also working very closely now with the diagnostics division and trying to bring a holistic approach to Roche to the whole area of risk management. So as I mentioned, we partner very closely with our quality risk organization. And they are responsible for the audits. They monitor complaints, recalls, discrepancies in the receiving of raw materials, and very importantly, process capability. They have a technical team that if there are quality issues, reliability issues with a supplier, they take the lead in assessing the situation with cooperation from procurement. And so the supplier quality organization really focuses more on making sure that we have reliable quality delivery of materials coming from our suppliers. On the procurement side, which is where I operate, we're really talking there more about sustainability and business continuity management. We look at supply chain risk, supply chain mapping, the financial health of our suppliers, and the performance of our suppliers as well. And again, the focus there is more of the business impact to the operation, both for Roche as well as the suppliers. So we have focused on 6 areas that we call the 6 main areas of risk procurement, in procurement of risk. And they are financial risk, supply risk, where I'll spend the bulk of my time, quality risk, which we again partner with our supplier quality organization to handle, contract risk, that we work with our contract department, innovation, technology, and IP risk. So in some cases where we are talking about novel products, where there is IP involved, we want to make sure that we are safe in that area, but also that we're dealing with suppliers that can provide us with technical and innovative solutions to our needs, et cetera. And then the sustainability piece, which is the safety, health, and environmental ethical issues, which we tend to use the transfer method in the sense that we use third-party firms to basically do the auditing in that area as well. So here's a high-level process. Now, we conduct risk assessments on the basis of business and patient impact. So we look at our suppliers and the raw materials they provide us on the basis of what is the situation to Roche if we were to have an extended interruption in the supply of this product. Okay? What is the revenue at risk? What are the equity market impact, if you will? All of the financial impact to an organization. But we also just equally also look at the patient impact. So if the materials are going into oncology drugs, they would get a higher priority than if they were going into a rheumatoid arthritis drug, et cetera. So we look at patient impact, business impact, and we prioritize on that basis. And then we ask questions in each of those areas that basically identifies what we consider a hazardous condition. If the answer is no, we record that as no in the rationale. If we say yes, then we basically put it in a risk assessment log. We develop risk mitigation recommendations. We work within Roche to establish a contingency plan within Roche. And then we basically move through the organization to gain approval, implement the plan, and monitor progress and status from there. The tool that we're using right now is an in-house Excel-based tool. It's very simplistic. It keeps it all together in one sheet. They answer the questions. It goes into another worksheet, and everything is in a nice Excel sheet, et cetera. So it works for us very, very well, very simple to do. So with that, I'm going to move into the 6 areas of challenges that we have and that I want to talk to. And I want to start with what I personally think, in personal experience, as probably one of the more challenging areas. How many of you know this character? Okay, Alfred E. Newman, the What Me Worry Kid, satirical magazine that was started in 1952. And often I find this character working at Roche and Genentech, okay? And a lot of other of my suppliers, they really take the attitude that, it won't happen, right? If it does happen, it won't happen to me. If it happens to me, it won't be so bad. And if it happens to me and it is bad, there was nothing that I could have done to stop it anyway. Okay? Risk management or business continuity management really is, I believe, a top-down situation. You need strong sponsorship, championship at the top, and moving it down to the organization. A grassroots effort usually results in very minimal results happening there. And with this kind of cognitive bias, if you will, as to how people respond to risk can make the job very challenging, very, very difficult. You can find individuals that are very optimistic and feel like, hey, it will never happen. And then you find others that really appreciate the fact that there is something that needs to be addressed. Research has basically shown that we tend to have positive illusions of, of what leads us to conduct the problem doesn't exist. And in a way, that's very good. We want a positive attitude. You've all heard that. You've got to have a positive attitude, right? So that tends to influence how we deal with risk. We intend to interpret events in an egocentric manner, meaning we take it from the standpoint of, what does it mean to me personally if I take this action? Or if I take this position, as opposed to what is in the best interest of the organization and to our patients as a whole. We tend to discount the future. We tend to say, live in the present. How many of you have heard that? Live today, live in the present, don't worry about tomorrow, that'll come soon enough. And most of us don't want to invest in preventing a problem that we have not personally experienced with vivid information or actually have experienced it. Okay, it's too remote. It's something that we don't want to really consider in our way of looking at risk. So research, again, has shown that decision-making deviates from rationality. We all like to believe that we make rational decisions. But the fact is we make decisions out of our emotions and out of our heuristics, rules of thumb, what we heard, what we learned, et cetera. We really don't apply rationality to the decisions that we make. And so the biggest risk you may be taking is discounting the possibility of an impact of an unexpected event. Who would have thought that an earthquake in Sendai, Japan, who was marvelously prepared for that, would then also face a tsunami in Fukushima and then a nuclear reactor meltdown? I mean, the odds are phenomenal that would happen, but it did happen. It did happen. And low risk doesn't mean no risk. And so it's important that we basically look at it in a serious manner. I found this report very interesting. This is a report from Alliance Risk Barometer. It just came out on January the 14th, where they talk about the fact that the risk of business interruption and natural catastrophes pose the biggest threats according to the Alliance. And for the first time, cybercrime, the internet, et cetera, is becoming into the top 10 risks. What I found more important, though, was that the comment was, however, it is no longer enough to have transparency of your most important suppliers. You also need to know how they manage their own supply chains. And I think that is the message that I want to leave you with, and I'll come back to again. It really talks to the fact that we as manufacturers, as suppliers, and you suppliers with your manufacturers need to be more collaborative, more sharing and transparent, and basically understand how the supply chains are managed, not just have transparency. So business continuity management. This is the area that I spend a lot of my time in, is in advising and working with our suppliers on business continuity management. To me, this is what it means to basically be involved in how you manage your supply chains. And there's a lot of information on this. You can go to the BCI Institute. There's other institutes as well. Many of the big insurance companies offer this kind of service as well. But as a minimum, what we ask our suppliers to do, what we're happy to guide them through that, et cetera, is to conduct a manufacturing site risk assessment. Look at your manufacturing site, what products you're making there, and assess what risks are potentially impactful to that site. And then to basically say, all right, let's take actions on those risks that we've identified so that we bring them to an acceptable level. And then this is where sometimes it gets a little bit difficult. But our position is that because your products are so impactful to us as a business and to our patients, we want you to basically develop a worst-case scenario for that risk. Now, in most companies, the most likely risk is fire explosion, especially if you're using a lot of solvents, like sometimes it's done in resin manufacturing or filter membrane manufacturing. So many times the issue is explosion, fire. The West dust fire that blew up the Kingston facility a few years back, which was devastating. But we want you together to basically say, here's the worst case scenario of that likely risk, and then to develop a recovery time objective that basically says, all right, if I face this worst case condition, how long is it going to take me to recover, to come back to normal operations? And then put a business continuity plan in place that says, here's how we're going to ensure that we can recover in that lead time. Now, Roche uses that lead time because that then establishes our level of what we call risk mitigation inventory. It is sufficient inventory to cover the time that that supplier needs to recover. So it isn't just a rule of thumb that we say, put 3 months of inventory in there, or put 2 weeks of inventory in there. No, it is based on the fact that the supplier conducted a risk assessment, that they established a recovery time objective, that they have a plan in place to meet that objective, and that they basically have worked on making sure that that is a viable plan. And so this is what we are working with our suppliers. You know, if they don't have this already there, we basically help them in how to conduct this. Again, there's a link there to the BCI organization, which provides a lot of wealth of information on this topic if you need more information on it. Supply chain complexities. So we know, and we've heard from other presentations, that a lot of the chemical manufacturing has moved into countries such as China and India, South America. And what Roche has tried to do in all cases where it's possible is to avoid having materials brought in from those countries. But obviously, that isn't possible. We had a colleague who once said, all roads lead to China, because you're just not going to avoid it. But to the extent that you can, then go ahead and do so. But you must know your supplier. You cannot rely on what you read on the internet or what you hear, second source or third source, et cetera. You need to go there and verify and understand clearly who that supplier is and what their supply chain has to be. And that gets to the next point, which is the number of intermediates in the supply chain. The more handoffs you have in the supply chain, the more risk you have of adulteration, counterfeiting, mishandling, et cetera. And unfortunately, when you go to distant countries, you then get brokers involved sometimes, you get repackagers involved sometimes, you get warehouses and distributors involved. But the cleanest thing to do is to have a straight line between the manufacturer and yourself, if at all possible. Minimize as much the handoffs. If you do have handoffs, then you need to understand who they are, how they operate, and how they're managing their operations. Supply chain visibility basically speaks to what I'm just saying right now, is that you need to understand who is involved in your supply chain, and if there are, in fact, points of failure or concern in that supply chain, and then appropriately address them. And then the supplier management program. In other words, we need to make sure that you as suppliers and we as manufacturers have a program that addresses in a formal, structured manner, documented manner, the qualification, the selection, the management, including risk management of these suppliers. You cannot leave that to rules of thumb and maybe I'll do it or maybe I won't or I'm going to do it my way, et cetera. It needs to be a formal, structured, documented process for consistency, for completeness, and for accuracy of the actual evaluation. Extremely important that we do that both as manufacturers and as suppliers. The manufacturing relationship. A supplier may be very important, critical to us as a manufacturer, but frankly, the manufacturer may not be very important to the supplier. In other words, many times we are not a big business for some of these suppliers. You know, I can tell you that 80% of my spend on raw materials is probably concentrated on about 10 manufacturers, and everything else is, I mean, it just drops off tremendously. And let's face it, we're high maintenance. To you suppliers out there, we know we are high maintenance. We ask a lot of you. Okay? Sometimes we ask a lot of you because regulatory requires that we ask this of you, et cetera. So we're in this together, but the fact is that in many cases, a lot of suppliers would just say, you know, go somewhere else if you don't like it. And that is a very big challenge. The other thing, which is very important, is how is that product fit into the portfolio of that manufacturer? And one of the things that is really complicating this thing is the consolidation that's going on in the industry. Millipore got purchased by EMD Merck, right? Research Organics got bought out by SAFC. Applied Biosystems got bought out by Life Technologies, who recently got bought out by Thermo Fisher. And every time that happens, where that product, the product that is critical to you as a supplier, as a manufacturer, that may have been a rising star in this company, all of a sudden could become a cash cow or a dog. And what does that mean? That means the new owner is not going to invest in that operation, which results in quality issues, delivery issues. And what I've seen happen most frequent is where a manufacturer, because of economic stress, et cetera, loses their portfolio and says, you know what? This product is not contributing profitably to my portfolio. I'm going to discontinue making the product. In that situation, even RMI is not going to cover you because you have residual risk. The time to qualify that material goes beyond the recovery time, and that is the worst case scenario for us in manufacturing. So it may seem trivial, but understanding where that product lies in that conglomerate, in that big business, is very important. And it's a challenge because even financially, you cannot get financial information on the business unit. Take a GE Healthcare. You go and what? You get GE Healthcare, right? But what about this facility in Uppsala, Sweden that's making your chromatography resins? What about them? How do they fit in the whole scheme of things? So this is a challenging area, but a very important area to have a good way of understanding with your supplier, your supply relationship is where does my product reside in your product portfolio? The supplier with which you have the greatest spend, again, is not necessarily the more impactful supplier. And many procurement organizations stratify their suppliers as the basis of where they're going to spend their time on the basis of spend. And that is fine from supplier relationship management, but we in risk management have to also say you've got to add these small spend suppliers because they are very impactful to our business. Extremely important that we do that. Regulatory compliance, I'm not going to spend too much time here. You already heard an excellent report on that. The QP declaration, as was mentioned, is extremely important, and that makes a lot of people nervous at Roche as far as signing that declaration that says, yes, that API was manufactured under GMP conditions, and it's all been assessed, et cetera. Why it's important to do the supply chain mapping and do the risk management according to that. But quite frankly, we have looked at this very carefully. We've yet to really take serious action on it because we know that we're going to open a can of worms. It's easy, let's just say easy, but it's fairly straightforward to identify risk. The challenge comes in mitigating that risk. What do you do after you identify that risk? Okay? But obviously you can't be an ostrich and put your head in the sand. We need to understand these risks, but we have to be prepared to take action on them. Because to identify them and not take action is probably a worse situation. You cannot claim that you didn't know that that was the situation. And the other thing is just the future direction of the regulatory bodies, whether it's the EU or the FDA or whoever else, et cetera. There are regulations that are coming. The direction of it is not clear as yet, et cetera. There's uncertainty around that area, and so that poses a challenge to us. Now, us as an industry, many times regulatory bodies will put out an opinion out there, and they leave it to us to define how we're going to address that. So that's where the Rx-360 organization, I think, plays a wonderful role in making sure that suppliers and manufacturers and regulatory bodies come in and decide on what is an appropriate and effective way to answer or respond to a need in industry, and not basically let everybody come up with a different way of doing it, which then adds for further uncertainty. And now you got companies that maybe go too far, others don't go enough, and it's a mishmash of situations. And so lastly, I want to end up with sustainability. Roche has a very strong sustainability program and a moral decision to support basically the triple bottom line. We participate in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and I'm happy to say that for 5 straight years, Roche has been cited as the most sustainable company in our sector, in the healthcare pharmaceutical sector. And Roche has made a moral decision to say, we're going to use the power of our purchasing power, if you will, to make sure that our supplier base practices sustainability principles. Now, this is a challenge in our relationship with suppliers. There are many suppliers out there that have outstanding sustainability programs, and in fact, a lot that we can learn from them. And there are others that we are going to need to basically encourage and help them to move along in this area. Now, Roche basically works with the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative. It's kind of like the Rx-360, except that this is more focused on the sustainability side of the business, reputational risk, ethics, safety, labor laws, et cetera. And you can see the member companies here at the bottom, et cetera. And basically, we've taken these principles, and this is what we then use to conduct audits of our suppliers, usually through a third party. Okay? But we do require all our suppliers to basically either adhere to our supplier code of conduct or to show us that they have their own supplier code of conduct that is aligned with ours. Okay? And again, as I said before, I know that we are hard maintenance. This is another item that we're adding on to our suppliers and say, you need to practice sustainability. We know it is a challenge to suppliers. We know it is a further burden at times. But there is, here again, financial information that clearly shows that companies that practice sustainability actually do better than companies that do not. So we encourage you to go into sustainability if you're not doing it already, and then you seek guidance either to the PSEI or, again, there's a whole wealth of information out there that you can basically look at to basically look at sustainability. So I want to leave you again with the fact that the statement that was made in this Alliance report, it's no longer enough to have transparency of your most important suppliers. You also need to know how they manage their own supply chains. And then they suggest that companies respond to those challenges with a combination of stronger internal controls and holistic approach to risk management. I think that's pretty well known. What I want to leave you with is this. We manufacturers and suppliers need to collaborate more and help each other to manage risk to our mutual benefit and the benefit of our patients. And I think that's the message that I want to leave you with today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.